Therapy podcast. My name is Jenny Helms, and I'm your host. Today, we are talking all about trauma, attachment, and substance abuse with my wonderful friend and colleague, Tracy Smith. And it is such an amazing episode. We go into all different details about how trauma, attachment, and substance abuse are intertwined. And I'm probably going to go back and listen to this one myself because there were just so many good little nuggets in here. I'm also excited to tell you guys about Soma Recovery, which is an integrative therapy center that treats both eating disorders, and it also works with the body piece of trauma therapy work. So our hope is to collaborate with other therapists in the community and to provide the body trauma therapy that Vander Kolk talks about in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. We also talk about this book in our podcast towards the end, so it's one of my favorite books that I would recommend. I think Vander Kolk is amazing, and to be completely honest, I haven't fully read that book from front page to back page, and it's on my to-do list, but I have attended a conference that Vander Kolk held all about what he talked about in that book, and it was very much a game changer for me. So anyway, I'm really excited to be able to provide some yoga instructors and massage therapists and other body workers that can help clients work on the body trauma piece as well, and to provide higher levels of care for eating disorders in Wichita. So I could probably go on and talk for another 20 minutes about this program, but I want to go ahead and get into the show so you guys can hear what you came to hear, and here we go. So we're just going to head right into it. Normally I would talk a little bit more, but we are a little bit on a time crunch. So we'll start with the first four and then go from there.
Okay.
So what did you want to be when you grew up?
So I was thinking about that, and I even checked with my mom. I'm like, did I block something out? I always wanted to be a mom. That was the thing I wanted when I was growing up. But in kind of looking back, she helped me realize that I was always helping people everywhere I went. If someone had a problem with their boyfriend or their mother or financial problem or they just needed some help, that would become my focus, and I was always helping people. So I think I was practicing for a long time, and it kind of led into being a therapist.
Yeah, you were a natural helper.
I guess so.
That's neat.
Yeah.
That's cool. I was not a natural helper when I was a kid. So I like to hear people's stories. But yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that they did know when they were little, which is pretty cool. I think that's a neat experience that you're able to just kind of grow into that role that was already natural for you. Yeah,
because I really didn't know that particularly I would be a therapist, but I was always interested in helping people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what has been what I call your worst or most learning moment in therapy so far?
That question is so difficult for me. I think that just whenever any of my clients are really in some kind of danger, I perceive that there's danger, I start to really make it about me. And I'm having to learn that, they have choices and it's not all about me. And it's not necessarily something I've done or not done that's dependent on their success or their failure. Yeah. And also, I think the second thing that's been a real learning experience for me is just to kind of calm down sometimes when I get a little super zealous about trying to sort of push someone into having some insight and let it be their journey and just not be pushy about it.
Yes. Yeah. That's been something I've been growing with as well as a clinician and therapist, and I think I shared in one of the podcasts earlier that I was even called out during supervision when we were we both are in the same cohort for Friends University MFT program, but I was called out in supervision for doing some of that, so I can relate to that. And now I want you to brag a little bit on yourself for a minute. What have been some of your best moments in therapy?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many moments, and I just realize, it takes such bravery and courage to do the hard work in therapy, and so it's hard to boil that down also to particular moments. I think the times that I've felt the very best is when I've seen sustained change. I have a gentleman that I've been seeing for 13 months, and he's coming up on his 1 year of sobriety. Wow. And just journeying with him, lots of aha moments, but just such persistence and bravery, and seeing him put everything that he's learned and how he's grown, put it all into practice and walk it out in everyday life. Yes. Those are the best moments.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And to see that progress, and I don't know. I definitely can relate with some of my clients with their journey, and just being able to see that they haven't acted out in several months, and to even, sometimes I visually have them see it because I have them fill out an assessment when they come in, and then they do it later on, and put them side by side, and it's just like...
That's a good idea.
So, it's great. It's good because it's really, like you said, it's their work. We can't really make them do anything, and so being able to give them that credit and show them that.
It's hard work.
It is hard work. I know. We're like, I feel like sometimes I'm like, I know that I'm asking you to come in here and do some of the hardest, most uncomfortable things that you'll do throughout your week, right? And so what an honor
exactly.
to even give us that opportunity.
No kidding. A privilege, for sure.
And then what's your spirit animal? Something a little bit more lighthearted.
So that was kind of funny. I thought, gosh, I don't know. So I took a quiz.
You did?
Did you want to know the results?
Yes, I do.
I'm an owl.
That wouldn't surprise me. I can see that. Yeah, I can totally see that.
I'm an owl, I guess.
That's great.
But then I heard one of your podcasts, and somebody said that they were an INFJ, and that was Panda. I'm also an INFJ, kind of one of those weirdos. So I don't know. I could be a panda, too.
That might be why we get along pretty well, too, because I'm an ENFJ.
Okay.
And so or at least I feel like we have some very big similarities. So
absolutely.
That's really cool. You guys are even, you guys are a rare breed in a
That's
good way.
probably why I've always felt strange. Like I'm weird and different. Maybe.
No, you guys are great. I mean, at least my type definitely thinks you're great. So.
Well, thank you.
Well, cool. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
That's neat. So, we're going to go into our topic today, which is about substance abuse, how that's related to trauma and attachment. And I'm just curious what you think is the most misunderstood thing about trauma or substance abuse therapy. What are some of the things that you feel are commonly misunderstood?
Okay. Well, I think as far as in the realm of addiction, people sometimes mistake an addict's behavior as that they're a bad person or of poor character, or they don't want to change, just kind of a loser,
right.
Right. And as far as trauma, I think it's important to remember that it's a real subjective experience, and that any event that kind of overwhelms the nervous system and causes you to react differently in the future and sort of loads up sensations and thoughts and so forth can be traumatic.
Yes.
And that stuck trauma that's not processed in the brain is really part of what people are trying to fix with an addiction. So it's not so much that the drug is the problem. It's more, I think, as far as addiction goes, the pre-existing vulnerabilities that can bring about addiction, such as emotional isolation, powerlessness, stress.
Yeah.
So, they did those studies, the Rat Park studies, which kind of kind of proved that point. They put a single rat, giving him access to morphine. And then they did it with a rat park, like families of rats. And the single guy drank 20 times more morphine than the rats in Rat Park, who had, that emotional isolation and the stress and everything that came with that, caused the rat to drink more morphine. So there really is something about some of these pre-existing vulnerabilities that cause people to try to use drugs to tamp down the symptoms of their trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. I'd never heard of that study, but I remember a TED Talk talking about how important connection was, and in my brain it made sense, so I believed it, but I do love sometimes seeing those tangible studies too.
Which really brings us to the next point as far as attachment. We're such vulnerable, dependent creatures. Baby humans are, right?
Yes.
And we have natural chemicals that are that happen when we have good interaction with our caregivers, those endorphins. And opiates kind of mimic that feeling for people who didn't have the good attachments, and they're sort of looking for that good feeling of the endorphin. Uses the same receptors. And so there's a quote in a book about a woman who took a shot up with heroin and said it felt like a warm hug. And there's a reason for that, because the opiate is kind of giving the feeling of what she would have gotten in that real warm hug with her mom, and what she's kind of searching for.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just powerful language even, and It's amazing how much I think we as humans, especially now with technology and everything else, we kind of don't realize how vulnerable and how much we actually need, a secure attachment. I think it gets looked at as weak, or that, we're just coddling our children or this or that. And, again, in this technology age, people are being even more and more disconnected. I love technology. I think it can bring so many beautiful things into our world. But yeah, that's interesting to see the connection piece of it, likely and impacting people in the addiction world, I'm sure.
Sure.
I don't know if you would say that. Well, let me phrase it this way. I feel like I see more and more addiction, and maybe that's just my clinical lens, but I feel like I see more and more of it, whether it's a substance abuse or just being addicted to things and objects and
phones,
gratification, or addicted to work and addicted to I think addiction is something that honestly all of us humans have some experience with or can struggle with, and on different levels. All of us.
And kind of on the spectrum, right?
Yes.
And some addictions are a little more socially acceptable than others, like workaholism,
Yes. Eating
for
disorders
sure.
Even. I talk about that. I think some of my clients, if they hadn't found the strategy of an eating disorder, probably would have found other strategies, but I think some people choose... I'm not, and again, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but one of the components is that I think people feel a bit more... powerful or socially acceptable if their addiction is restricting or dieting, right, or something that our culture glamorizes, or even exercise, right? Exercise addiction is a thing, and that's...
Sometimes I even think about just overachieving in general.
Oh man, that's been an addiction of mine for sure. When I was younger, and I still have to be very careful to monitor my own overachievingness. So,
I hear you.
I don't know if that's relatable.
It is totally relatable. Totally.
So,
excuse me.
What do you think are some things that non-substance abuse specializing therapists or clinicians, or just people in general, don't really understand about clients that struggle with substance abuse, or something that they might miss because they don't have as trained of an eye or as much experience working with those clients?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that most people, maybe someone who's not trained, wouldn't understand that it isn't about bad character, that it's about pain. When someone's sitting in front of me struggling with addiction, I see a hurt person,
yes,
not a bad person.
yes.
And so I think that's first and foremost something that's really important to realize. And also that when we can heal that wound, when the client can go through the process of being healed, then there won't be a need for the addiction.
Right.
It's really just a maladaptive coping to try to handle what they're going through. And we know that when we have stuck traumas, it's very uncomfortable. It creates bodily sensations, feelings, thoughts, triggers that can make daily life quite a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just knowing that it's tied to pain, and it's not just someone who can't kind of get it together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody simply making bad choices, right?
Exactly.
Even though it was interesting, do you follow Juggling the Jenkins at all?
No.
It's like a mom who she's been through recovery and she's now sober, but she talked about how she gets the question of, isn't it just a choice? And she did a little spiel the other day, and she was like, who cares?
Right.
She's like, even if it is,
right.
This is still such an important thing. And, I mean, we know it's more complex than that, but, I think at the end of the day, for people to be able to understand that regardless of where or what it's coming from, it's important, and these people are hurting, right?
Right. And it really, I believe it's tied to traumas and or attachment problems.
Well, and I guess, okay, so I'm going to veer off the questions a little bit into some other ones. But from a family perspective, because I know you've worked a lot with the families, why do you think they are so resistant to seeing their loved one as hurt, and that maybe, why do you think they, choose to see it as more of a choice initially, right? Or that's their gut instinct for some people, is to see it as being more about their character or about, them being a loser or whatever. Like, why might that benefit them to do that?
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of the behaviors that come with addiction, there's collateral damage. And people are hurt. They're genuinely hurt by their loved ones who are in addiction. Addiction can drive you to lie and steal and cheat and lots of things to be able to feed your addiction. So there's that. I think we know from a systemic point of view that that the system has a problem. It's just there isn't an identified patient, right? And I think it feels easier to families to come in and go, hey, look, they're the one that's been acting out. Fix them.
Yeah,
fix them. And then we'll be okay. And they just really are not, they're kind of oblivious to the fact that this is a systemic problem, and that there is an interplay and a balance that's happened within that system, which involves their behaviors too. Yes. And so that's a really challenging thing, is to kind of walk delicately and show people, yes, you've been hurt, and here's how you're helping maintain this balance. We need a new balance. We need a new homeostasis. How do we work towards that? It involves change all the way around.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think sometimes it's hard for people, well, it's hard for any family system to admit that, not only are they contributing to it, but it may actually be uncomfortable for them when their loved one starts to get better.
Absolutely. I talk about boundary flack a lot because, in a kind of a dysfunctional system like that, there's not generally good, healthy boundaries. Right. And so say one person in that system begins to change and grow, and they set healthy boundaries, there may be somebody else in that system that says, whoa, go back to the way you were. This is how I know to do it. And I don't really like this new person who says no when they want to say no, or who doesn't, enable me, or who doesn't, whatever the case may be.
Right.
Right? So, yeah, it can be hard to accept. We're finding a new normal.
Yes.
And we've used the behaviors that all of the family members have fallen into have served a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. They're not for nothing. They're really pretty incredible people, just like you talked about people with eating disorders and look at what you found, to use to cope and so forth. And it's the same with families. And so that's one of the things I try to do is to point out, well, look at you guys. You figured a way to make this work. And now some of those things, they're not working for you. Mm-hmm. So how can we kind of alter that, change it, get a new balance for you guys, a new way of being?
Mm-hmm. And often they have to grow and become healthier too in that process.
Absolutely.
And that's very uncomfortable.
And right. So everybody's kind of used to what they're used to.
Right.
And change is hard.
Yes.
It requires a lot of hard work and intention.
Yes.
So, and that can be a big surprising thing to people who come in thinking, hey, fix my loved one. Yes. To find out that there might be something they need to do as well.
Well, and I think I almost made a Facebook post about this week. One of my biggest frustrations with the family systems when they're not, they come in, they have their kiddo come in, they're not really wanting to do as much family work, and then they'll ask me, what can I do? What can I do to help them? And it's almost like they're like, I want a book to read, I want instructions about how to parent, but I don't want to do therapy myself. I don't want to grow myself, right? And because the biggest thing that I could tell them that they need to work on is they need to do their own work.
Absolutely.
They need to be in therapy themselves, either individually or at least doing the family work with their kiddo on top of everything. And they don't want to hear that. They want me to give them a book or a pill or something else,
exactly.
But they do not want to do that.
They don't want to hear the words, focus on you.
Yes, focus on you and your journey
exactly.
in the ways that you don't realize you're unintentionally hurting or enabling or just, all the things that you see in your work working with families.
And sometimes there's a lot of pushback because they're like, you're kidding me. You want me to change? Do you not see how they've hurt me?
Right.
And so there can be some resistance there and they might need to work through a little bit of that to kind of get to the place where they can focus on their part in that dynamic.
Right. I still to this day have this I love you, Mom. She's an amazing human being who's grown a lot since this point, but there was a point when we were doing our family work and she looked at me one day and she says, I resent you. Like, I resent you for making me do this work. And it was painful at that moment. But it makes me so proud of her because I think she had to go there. She had to feel that. She had to get to that. She had to feel that and at least be willing to say that.
Kind of name it to tame it, huh?
Yes, to grow and to actually do the work. And at this point, she's one of my family members that I think has done the most work and the most growth, even though there was that moment in time where she was looking at me and she's like, I have to feel all this. Really in that moment, it was like, I have to feel all this pain and you're making me actually face it.
Absolutely.
And I think, again, she's an incredible, strong woman, and I think I'm able to share that at this point because of that. But, I'm sure you've seen so many moments like that in the work I know I have, and in different ways, maybe not that blatant,
Absolutely.
But that was a blatant moment I remember having with my own mom, and how hard this work is.
Yeah, it became evident to me really early on, being an addiction counselor before I was an MFT, that working with family systems that had a loved one going through residential treatment for addiction was such beautiful golden ground to learn about therapy, because these people are just experiencing so many different kind of hardships as a result of their addictions. I mean, relationship discord and financial problems and you name it, legal, all kinds of things, and just in so much pain. And I'm just pretty in awe of all the systems that go through the work needed to kind of become healthy.
Right. It takes a lot.
Yeah.
It does. And I had a question around how do you approach family work with families. I don't know if you wanted to add to that because we've kind of been talking about it.
So I think that it does involve quite a bit of education and helping them understand how the brain holds trauma and what's going on and what the purpose the addiction is serving, so that they can kind of come to an understanding that, my husband or my brother or my son, they're not just doing this to hurt me. They're not just making bad choices because that's what they want to do. So a lot of education around that. And then as far as the family system behaviors, really normalizing that and almost, like you said, praising them for finding a way to deal,
Yes.
finding a way to cope. Yes. And then just, encouraging them that there can be a new, better way for them. Just kind of talking about helping them see the kind of compensatory behaviors that we family members kind of fall into when there's addiction present. And, or maybe we had them to begin with. I don't know. I think maybe I was kind of born into some of those ways. Just really trying to give them a lot of empathy, education, support, and a little push.
Yeah, and a little push. No, that's
right.
For sure.
Right.
That is for sure.
Yeah. And I'm trying to learn this as a person still. I'm starting to practice this more and more. But to celebrate all the successes, right? We tend to really zero in on where we think we've messed up, where we didn't. When is that time that I drank, and I really screwed up again, right? So I kind of liken it to if I'm on a diet and I can't have any chocolate cake, and if I go 90 days and I don't have any chocolate cake at all, right? But on day 91, I eat the whole dang cake, right? Am I going to focus only on day 91? Or am I going to remember the 90 days that I did well? And so a lot of, I'm trained in EMDR, and so I like to use bilateral stimulation and positive state to help them really soak that in and celebrate all of their successes along the way. But also, then, just because I ate the whole cake on day 91, does that mean I need a whole cake on day 92? Right. Right. And so just kind of acknowledging the struggles, affirming the pain, a lot of cheerleading, a lot of helping them see they feel so bad. There's just this horrible shame cycle that they get into. So just working a lot on helping them see that they are not bad.
Yes, that they are not what they do.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all of us humans can relate to shame, right? Feeling
absolutely.
Shame in our lives.
Right.
And yeah, are you a Brene Brown fan?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, her work has been life-changing for me as a human, and especially I feel like it applies to addiction work and trauma and
absolutely.
Attachment. And if you're human, you could use her work, basically.
Right. So, exactly.
But yeah, she talks a lot about, separating healthy guilt from shame, and that identifying with what you do. Like, I am this thing because I do it.
Right.
I wonder what you think about this, because I've always hated in AA world where people say I am an alcoholic.
Right.
I've always hated that because I felt like that it made them identify too much with the alcohol struggle and make that a part of their identity, which I know it's important that people own that part of them. And I think it's like it's them trying to say, hey, this is how we own that part of us, and I think we can own that part without identifying with it. But I've always hated the I'm an alcoholic thing, and I'm wondering if you have a different view on it.
I don't like it either.
Okay.
I really don't like it because, yes, I'm so much more than my mistakes, right? And I'm not my mistakes. the things in therapy that I really can appreciate about AA and want to bring some of the attributes into therapy are, I love that they have there's a focus on the spiritual aspect of things, and I do believe that God is the ultimate healer, and that's something that I want. I think God created us for connection with Him and with each other. It's that connection piece again. And so I like to bring that into therapy. I like to bring in the support aspect. I think a lot of people are successful in AA because there are other people there cheering them on and saying, me too.
Yes.
And that's really, really important. And then there is that accountability piece. But yeah, as far as I am, well, I'm Tracy, you're Jenny. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm more than some label. I don't think labels are so important, and I think that not, hey, if it works for you, that's okay. You know, that's okay. Think, but I have struggled with that a bit too.
Yeah. Well, and I had a professor at one point talk about how they connected, you know, substance abuse recovery to grieving, because you're grieving that identity, right? You're grieving the identity you were. That you did have, and so it's a grieving process, and then, you know, having to rediscover who you are, you know, life outside of having that in your
I think that's
life.
Interesting, because there are a lot of, you know, there's a lot of research that says that addiction is not just about the acquisition of the drug, it's about all the behaviors leading up to it as well. Yes. And so, you kind of get into those norms too, and this is how I function. This is my lifestyle. This is, you know, what I do. Yeah,
and grieving that, you know, those parts of you, right, that you no longer are going to utilize in the ways that you were, because now you're going to have hopefully different parts that will take over, healthier parts.
Right. And so it's important to find other things to sort of put in its place, because it is kind of like kicking a coping leg out from underneath someone when you ask them to stop drinking or stop using. And so that's another aspect that's really important, is we've got to have some other behaviors in there. Yes. We need that metaphorical tool belt of behaviors and coping skills that we can go to and that can become automatic, because we know that they will if we hang in there, right? Because we have incredible brains that are rewirable, that we can create new neural pathways by the repetition of our behaviors. And that's how addiction, there's definitely neural pathways built around that, but we have incredible brains that can create new ones.
Yes.
So
we do.
I'm eternally hopeful.
Yes. Yeah. No, there's so much there. I was going to go in one direction and I let that thought go because I wanted to just soak in what you were saying. And with our brains, I think it is important to understand that we can rewire things even up into our 70s. Some of the research, we have research for that age group. Maybe we don't for the 80 or 90-year-olds, and they probably still can. But I like to give that hope to my clients, because I think that's part of their process, is even believing that it's something
that's possible, right?
Possible,
right?
Yeah, and then going back to the piece where like you said, our clients wouldn't have their addiction or their eating disorder if it wasn't serving a purpose for them, and if they didn't need it in some way, right? So you don't want to kick those legs from under them. We're not, sometimes I've even said in therapy, I think my clients usually look at me like, what? When I'm like, maybe you need this right now, right? Maybe you just need to be doing what you're doing, right? That's not me saying, hey, I want you to do this, or we're not ever going to change it. But I want them to understand that, that there is a part of them that needs to do it, and that it's serving a purpose, and maybe even a protective purpose,
right?
For them. So we don't want to just take it away from them without giving them something else to hold on to, or to help them through whatever it is that they're kind of protecting themselves from, or needing to work through.
Right. And that's a difficult situation when it's alcohol or opiates and your husband or wife is getting ready to leave you, And, to be able to say, well, this is serving a purpose. Maybe you need to do this isn't usually in the vocabulary where there's substance abuse, right?
No.
Because we're too afraid of the collateral damage that it could cause, and it feels so life and death sometimes.
Do you think that could be bad though? Because I agree with you that there's such a severity to it, and some with some of my clients too, there's such a severity of the medical consequences of their eating disorder, and I don't want that for me at least, I see it as I don't want that anxiety to be leading the session, because I think sometimes just simply saying it's almost like a strategic approach in a way. It's like maybe you need this right now, that it kind of changes the dynamic for them to where they're able to see it differently and work differently.
I think the language that I tend to use when it comes to substance abuse is lapse and relapse. And that a lapse, number one, doesn't have to be a relapse, right? So if I ate the whole cake on day 91, I don't have to on day 92. Right? So there's that difference. And also that it's all information. It's all information for us. What can we, instead of kicking ourselves, what can we learn from it?
Yes.
And so that's an approach I try to take and normalize those bumps in the road. That there probably will be times where you won't do this perfectly. I don't do anything perfectly, right?
Yeah, no.
I mean, there's always bumps, and why should addiction be any different? Right. And but we're taught everything's feedback, right? And so what can we gain from that? What can we learn from it? We can make something good from it.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, it's I think I love this work because of the challenges and how complicated it can be at times, because I'm weirdly into that stuff. I'm like, let's get into the complexities of it, and where I know we're talking about so many good things, but it's so case by case,
Absolutely.
What you do, how you approach it, how you approach the family system. That there's no one cookie cutter kind of response for all family systems or all people, and
that is true.
But yeah, that's so good. I love the languaging that you use, because it sounds like you do a great job of just taking the shame from that experience and helping them, helping them do that for themselves.
Yeah, and I want my clients to know that they don't have to be ashamed to come back. If they fall off the wagon and go on a bender for a week and miss 2 appointments, that they can still call me.
Yes.
So I work really hard to try to let them know that I have an understanding of how difficult this is, and that those can be learning experiences, and those don't define them. Right. So that maybe they'll make that call again.
Right, and that they don't have to worry about coming into they're already trying to get healing, but I think sometimes people can unintentionally shame or be disappointed and use that and their attempts. It comes from a good place of wanting to help them, trying to motivate them or get them to
kind of
change.
That tough love thing,
tough love, right? But they don't realize that it's actually again systemically feeding into the problem and or part of the problem. And so I love that.
It's tough, it's that
balance.
I love in life there's truth and there's grace, and I think both are important.
Yes.
So it's finding that balance,
right?
Right?
Yes. That's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. I love that. Now let's talk a little bit more about the trauma piece, because you talk about how much trauma and substance abuse almost are just they're one and the same in a way, where it's like whenever you're working with a person, you're working with trauma. So tell me more about how you approach the trauma piece and how you see it, how you see trauma in your clients, or how you kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? how you explain it to them.
How I explain trauma to them?
Yep. How you work
Well,
with them.
I'm pretty visual, and I like to demonstrate. I definitely use some of Siegel's stuff. And like to educate, with my fist and explaining the brain. But then I will go a step further, and I act like I'm popping the amygdala out of my brain, right? And I hold my index finger up and show them, okay, so here's the amygdala. My fingernail is the amygdala, and that is the part of my brain that's kind of the smoke detector. It's in charge of deciding whether something's a threat. And behind it sits a hippocampus, which is like the librarian of the brain. Well, the amygdala has to kind of give the event a hashtag and send it back to the hippocampus so that it can be filed away in the brain as a long-term memory, right? And so we have events happening all the time, and the amygdala's, at work giving hashtags, right? And so I like to talk about when my granddaughter was born and I got to witness that. I am quite sure my amygdala was like, hashtag love, happiness, joy, this is awesome. Send it back to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus says, oh, I know where to file that. Filed it away. But when traumatic events happen to us, it's like the amygdala can't make sense of it. It can't give it a hashtag. So it stays stuck in the limbic part of the brain. And that stuckness creates a lot of those unbearable symptoms that to us would be anxiety, depression, those kinds of symptoms that we would see with anxiety and depression, negative beliefs, all kinds of uncomfortable bodily sensations, okay? And so it's stuck there, and all the while new events are coming in all the time. Well, the amygdala can't tell time. Can't tell time. And it kind of categorizes things by what did it look like? What did it smell like? What did it feel like? And so when another event comes in that looks like, smells like, sounds like, in some way, that old trauma sitting there, it's like all of the emotions of that original trauma flood forward and dump on that current situation. And so it's really important that we get to those stuck traumas so that we can get them processed through and filed away, and they're no longer causing you all of the pain and the symptoms that you're trying to get away from and using maladaptive behaviors to try to cope.
Yes, to not feel that pain, to not feel those bodily sensations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable.
And we all have trauma, right? It doesn't have to look like a hurricane coming through our house.
No.
Or a parent's divorce necessarily, but anything that's stuck.
Yeah. Well, and we know that you could have one big singular event that causes PTSD, and that could be traumatic. Or you could grow up feeling criticized and have more complex trauma that is stored in there. There's so many ways. And then there's the piece about the vulnerabilities that are there. Do I have good attachment, connection? Am I supported emotionally, physically? All of those things can really determine how we take in an event. So two different people could have potentially the same event happen, and one, it might feel more traumatic to the other. One, it might overwhelm their nervous system, as Bessel van der Kolk says, and cause that system to be overwhelmed and create that stuck trauma.
Yes. And one of the things that I've been learning in therapy for myself is about the parenting, or actually the parent's response sometimes to a kid's trauma. Right, so if a kid's going through trauma, the response of the people around them, even if they have support and love, if they respond a certain way to it, that impacts how it's stored or not stored, or if it gets stuck or not, or can be traumatic in and of itself, the actual way that people respond to it. And so
absolutely, that
was something I think that was really interesting for me to pay more attention to, because before I'd been paying attention to all those other pieces, and then I was like, wow, but this matters so much too. Like
it
how
does.
The family responds to
and
it.
It's so highly influenced by whatever the parents' experiences have been.
Yes.
And what what their upbringing was like, what their attachment, did they have a secure attachment? Have they had trauma? Mm-hmm. And, when a person has that stuck trauma, it really affects their window of tolerance, their ability to tolerate emotions. Mm-hmm. And if they have a pretty small window of tolerance because of stuck trauma, that window is going to be pretty small for their child's emotions too. Yes. And they're not going to be able to tolerate it. And sometimes parents do things that are very dismissive, not meaning to. It's just that their window of tolerance can't handle it.
And that goes back to, what we were discussing earlier, how important for the parents. They don't realize how important their work is, because when they increase their window of tolerance, mm-hmm. Not only are they showing those behaviors and giving their kiddos the experience of that, like how is it to experience a human being who does this, right? Because mm-hmm. often these kiddos are growing up in environments where, like all of us, we all have our stuff, right? And the mm-hmm. parents have their stuff. So they... the parents want their kid to mature, outgrow them in a lot of ways and mature past them. And I'm like, that's a really tricky thing to do, because they have less developed brains than you do. Mm-hmm.
And brains that are modeled after theirs.
Right. And they're modeled right after your behaviors. And so it's like you're asking them to do something that is almost impossible. And they mm-hmm. still can. They can gain that sense of self. Mm-hmm. It is just all the more harder, mm-hmm. right? And some kiddos have to, because of different reasons, or parents' inability for their own reasons, right. too, and having empathy for that. But yes, if the parents can get that work, mm-hmm. this is part of why that right. is so important to their kiddos.
And to me, that's a moment that we can celebrate in therapy and say, this is cycle breaking stuff. Mm-hmm. This is what we're doing, because that, we've got the child and the parent, and who knows how far up the family tree.
Yes.
Stuff has kind of rolled down that way and been modeled that way. And then there's the aspect of trauma that is genetic.
Yes.
Right? So that opens a whole nother can of worms. But with epigenetics, we're seeing, they did the studies on Holocaust survivors mm-hmm. and who had been through concentration camps and all of those things and experienced horrible traumas, and they're seeing the symptoms of those traumas in grandchildren yes. of those people who never experienced those events.
Yes, like the biological symptoms where things were so... I don't know if this is the same study, but I was reading one about the cortisol levels where... Yeah. Basically, they'd had increased cortisol levels due to their traumas, mm-hmm. chronic trauma over time, and that changed their genes, and then they passed mm-hmm. it on to where these kiddos were already predisposed to having mm-hmm. high cortisol levels, and their body
right.
would feel like they were experiencing the chronic trauma of their ancestors, even though that trauma wasn't happening
even at the similar age.
Yes.
So it's
so fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Yes, and to see the science, because we like in our field, we kind of knew that for a while. We had people like mm-hmm. Bowen who were just like, intergenerational transmission, mm-hmm. but we didn't have the genetic science
right.
to prove it. And now we have the hardcore science that says, yeah, this is a real thing. Like we can tangibly show you this. It's not just some weird theory.
That can be a really good in with clients too, who are maybe those overachieving or perfectionistic type people who feel like I don't want to have any trauma. I don't want to be a person with trauma. Yes. That's bad. No, my family's good. It's all fine.
Everything's perfect.
And so even to be able to bring that in and say, who knows? But maybe it's something. Yes. 2 generations, whatever, above you, maybe there's something. Opens up
no control over, right?
Right. That you had, so it doesn't feel so like, oh, my family's bad or whatever.
Bad yes.
It can kind of open a door for conversation there.
Yes, and I think to parents too, because I think when I think if I were to just say out of the gate, you need therapy, mm-hmm. I think that would feel to them like, ugh, like that's
right.
a shame thing, or they feel like, oh, are you putting this on me, right? And I'm sure that would be frustrating, but we're not. This isn't about parent blaming or family blaming. No. This is just like, we have to look at the whole
fixing
big
the
picture.
System, right?
The context. There's so much that we inherit that we have no control over. It's not our fault, but it is our responsibility at that point to do something about, and we can, which is cool.
Right.
Epigenetics, I think it's been so cool because I think it shows us how we can change. If we inherited certain genetics, we can change them and then pass on better genetics to our generations. And that's so cool.
Kind of relating that to kind of a spiritual aspect. I was just listening to a Christian comedian that was talking about how our lives are much like the structure of comedy, which is there's a setup and then there's a punchline. Okay? And in our lives, that setup is what have we received, right? What did you receive genetically? What did you receive relationally? What are the traumas that you have experienced? What has it taught you? What have you been practicing that you can use for your purpose? And he said one thing that I thought was so cool. He said, sometimes your setbacks can be part of your setup. And the farther you're set back, it can be like a slingshot that's pulled back. And then when it's let go, it reaches farther than. And so I think that we're all kind of wounded healers, right? And I think about, gosh, the people that come in as clients and some of them that have had some pretty severe setbacks, how far they might go and how much their stories can help heal other people. And so it's kind of cool to sit back and look at that big context too, and how the world can change based on the pain that we've endured.
Yes. No, that's beautiful, because I've never even thought about how to put that into a metaphor, but I've always felt that the people who go through more and grow through it are just, they have something that other people don't, right? And I don't know how to describe that necessarily. I don't know if there are words, but there's something very beautiful about it if they're able to grow through it. And giving
and
that
be
hope
used.
to people, who have been through so much, and that can be an asset, right? But I love the slingshot analogy. That is really cool. I like that. I like that. Very, very cool. I love that. Well, let's go into our final four.
All right.
Let's go ahead and talk about the one thing you wish. Well, I kind of frame this as the one thing, but what's one thing that you wish you knew when you first started doing therapy?
Can I do two?
Yeah. Sure.
All right. I think that trauma therapy can take a long time. I went and became trained in EMDR, and I love it, and it definitely can speed up the process. But even just getting someone ready for trauma therapy, that's where the time has to go, because we do have to increase that window of tolerance, and we have to increase the ability to return to the window of tolerance if we get out of it, and there's a lot of work around that.
Yes.
Personally, I think I heard it, but I think I didn't really realize how important it would be to have other therapists, friends, to talk to.
Yes. Yes.
That it's really, I feel so much better when I can talk to other people who get it. Yes. So, I think I wish I knew how important that was.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, because not only for like peer consult, I think it's important that we're always growing and learning and getting feedback, but you're right, not everybody's a scuba diver in the ways that we are, or at least scuba dives the seas that we scuba dive, and I appreciate my therapy friends, and I think this is a shout out to therapists out there, that it's important that we network, and that we, not for just the business purposes, like that's like a small portion of it, it's more about our own ability to increase this work and love it and enjoy it and grow from each other.
It is wonderful, wonderful work, and it can be hard.
Yes.
And so we need each other.
Yeah, and weirdly, we all chose it, so we gotta look at ourselves too. Why did we do this?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, we've got to kind of laugh at ourselves too, because we have our own quirks that draw us to this field as well.
For sure.
Just like any field, I think people make fun of our field in that way. Like they're like, "Ooh, they all." I'm like, "Okay, you chose your field for a reason too, and the ghost you're running from." So let's just keep it real.
Yeah.
What is the best psych-related book for people in the field and then people outside of the field?
Well, I have 2 books, and really I think they can be good for either, in or out, both of them.
Okay.
In grad school, what really propelled me towards trauma work was The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So, love that book. And I think it was written for the layperson as well as the therapist.
Yes.
But be prepared, it is packed full. It is dense with information. And so it's not like an easy read in that way. Such a good book, though. And then I really like the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate.
I've heard about that one.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, but I'm putting that on my list now.
He does a really good job of kind of explaining a lot of the things we've talked about, and then he goes more into the brain science as far as chemicals and receptors and how all that ties to attachment and so forth. And he says it well.
Yes, I've listened to some of his talks, and I've gotten a lot out of it. Like, I mean, I've gotten a lot out of just that, so I can imagine that.
And a person who hasn't, dealt with addiction in their family or doesn't have a firsthand experience of it, he tells a lot of stories. So that's nice. He balances all the intricate knowledge he has with some interesting stories too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And what's a favorite quote of yours, or some messaging or wording that's just really impacted you?
So I remember something that I used to have on my whiteboard at Valley Hope a lot, and it was Brene Brown.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah, and it was, when we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write the ending. So, and she has a lot of good quotes, about it's only when we're brave enough to, look into the darkness will we discover the power of our light. Yes. I love that one too, when I think about the bravery that it takes. And then also, I like one by Nelson Mandela that says, "May your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears." I think it's just so easy to live in fear and be sort of stuck.
Right. And I kind of, the way that I frame it in my mind is, acting from those fearful parts or those other parts of us, not our best self, but our parts, right?
Exactly.
And that aren't really us. And I love how that's framed, because it's like, yes, we want to act from our healthy self parts, not the unhealthy fears, right? Because that can, we can lead lives based on fear.
Oh,
running
yes.
off our fear. And I'm not going to go into this fear, but I'm like, our politics, people can choose their politics and how we run the system completely based in fear. And we don't want to, it's not the healthy space to live from.
For sure.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And the last question is, what's the one question I didn't ask that you felt would be important to share? The one thing we didn't cover that,
Gosh, I don't know. I just think it's important to remember that labels don't matter. We don't have to have an identified patient, kind of that systemic stuff we talked about. And that everything makes sense in context.
Yes, I love that.
Right?
I love it. Yes, it does. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain. You're a wealth of knowledge and a peer of mine and a friend, and I just appreciate you.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks for having me.